All right, welcome. I am Ken Weaver. I come to you from the land of the nickel. When I was a kid in Strathmere, I had a couple of paper routes, and they were the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Evening Bulletin, and you could buy an edition for a nickel. I lived on Sherman Road. When I made the money from the papers, I could walk up one block to Sumner, which was the Harvey's restaurant. They had a pinball machine just inside the door. Cost a nickel to play the game. I could play the jukebox, one song for a nickel. I could walk another block to Bill Tompkins' General Store and get an ice cream cone for a nickel. I could ride a couple more blocks on my bike, and next door was Harlan and Gogg's post office, and I could get an ice cold glass bottle of Coke for a nickel, right? We all remember. And Harlan and Gogg's also had a pinball machine where some of the paper route money went. 10 years ago, I gave a talk in this room about early Strathmere history. And this morning I'm going to do what I call an addendum. And I'm going to try not to repeat too much. Some of it will be a little bit of a repeat, but I want to give you some new things. And the two things I mostly want to talk about are Strathmere post offices, which I covered last time, but hopefully a little better today. And then Whale Beach, because I did not talk about Whale Beach, and I think it deserves some attention. And I think you'll be surprised. And the other thing as part of the talk is to talk about people, because it's not only places and things in Strathmere, but it's the people that make up history and make history interesting. Sorry about this, but I'm going to get hoarse. Oh, I'm an old person and I need reminders. So, can I? Lori, you got to give me a phone, or give me Jessica's phone. I know how to do it.
You got it? Okay.
Get in there. Thank you. So my arrangement with the SIA today, the financial arrangement, is based on the head count. And I wanted to make sure that I didn't miss anybody, you know. So, okay. This is a burning question for all of you, I'm sure. Most everybody thinks they know the answer, and they probably do. But I want to cover it quickly. When did Strathmere change its name? We all think it was 1912. In 2012, I was living in Strathmere. I knew that there'd been I read on the website about their naming contest. I wasn't quite sure when things happened. Well, I knew my grandfather had been the first postmaster, and I wasn't quite sure of the dates. So I went to the main Cape May County Library in Courthouse and found this booklet that lists the postmasters of Cape May County. And it listed Strathmere in the back. And the first one was on January the 17th in 1912. So I came back. I wrote a big article in the SIA newsletter about the naming contest, figured out what year the naming contest was. It kind of caught on. I suggested that we should have celebration to mark, oh, I missed the point. I went to the library in February. I look at this thing and it says, you missed it by a month. It was in January that they appointed the first postmaster, and it's already a month past the 100-year point. But I went back and I wrote the news article and said we should do a bunch of celebrations. Sure enough, in 2012, the fire company built this nice thing across the street. Debbie Woodcamp Vandergrift and I had historic trolley tours around the town. The 4th of July parade and the Nightmare parade both had this as themes. So 2012, we had a good year and celebrated the centennial, 100 years since the name change. And then a little later, we got this contact, and they sent this news article that says, "You got the year wrong." This is an article from 1910, special to the Inquirer. Corson's Inlet and Whale Beach have a post office beginning January 1st, 1911. What's going on here? George McCullough, my grandfather, is the only candidate to be postmaster. Well, when I gave the talk last time, I made this long excuse about why the contest was in 1910, but they didn't name it until 1912. And I said it was all bureaucracy. You know, the 2 railroads, the post office, the township, whatever. It took all that time to finally agree on what they're going to call Strathmere. Then I got another article from 1910, and it says, "The progressive residents of Strathmere are going to supplant Corson's with Strathmere. And already the Pennsylvania Railroad has recognized the name of Strathmere, and the station here is so designated." That was in 1910. So what's going on? Well, the answer was really in my talk, but I hadn't put it together yet. My grandparents built the store in 1910. He was the only candidate to be postmaster, and he was named, and they were going to put the post office in the new store. But the store had not been winterized, and the home had not been winterized. And then when the season ended in 1910, the McCullough family all went back to Philadelphia. And on January the 1st of 1911, there was no store open, no George McCullough in town. So they had to wait until they came back, I guess after school in 1912. Now, why they didn't start it in the summer of 1912 or even, in the summer of 1911 or even the 1st of January in 1912, I don't know. But I'm sure this date is now correct. January 17th, 1912. And for those of you who are going to still be around in 2112 to plan the bicentennial of Strathmere, we got the date right finally.
Yeah, if you play your cards right, you could probably have pre-celebrations.
So this is the first post office in that store that was built in 1910. And you know, you think of your grandparents as being old people. We all have grandparents, and you think of them as being old. But when our grandparents, Kate, built this, my grandfather was 33 years old. So it makes you think a little differently, you know, about people and what they did in the old days. That was the first post office. That was Carruthers Cottage, and then they moved the post office in the mid-20s to the second post office up on Sherman Road. This was at my grandparents' second place. They expanded it quite a bit later as the years went on. Kate and I lived there in the late 40s. There was a big storm in 50, and the Panuntos bought it and converted it into the motel. So this is the motel that was just torn down. There's now 3 houses there. And this is, of our 6 post offices, this is the only one you can't go look at. All the others are still in town. In 35, they lost the post office, and it went to the house right next to the church, which is still there. And it was here for 9 years, and in September 1944, what happened? Hurricane, big hurricane. You can see how high that, we're talking about building heights, right? Floods. You see how high the post office was off the ground. My grandparents' house on Sherman was about 3 more steps higher, and they had a lot of water in the living room. So you can imagine what happened to this post office. It didn't survive really as a post office that year after the hurricane. At the same time, you've heard this story. Harlan Woodcamp had taken over from his dad, Gus Woodcamp, running the West Jersey Cottage hotel. It was severe, this is on Winthrop. It was severely damaged so that the back end of it really almost couldn't be fixed. He was running a hotel across the street from the train station, which had always been the entrance to town. Everybody that came to Strathmere came on the railroad. But this was the 40s. The railroad wasn't running. People were coming to town over the bridge. He said, I want to service the people's needs. So he wanted to build a garage and a gas station and a luncheonette, and he wanted to be where the people were coming into town, next door here on Willard. So the front of the hotel was moved. You've heard that story. Debbie gave me this picture of in 1945, he's building the garage on that lot. And you can see the old firehouse on the right, and I think this house is still there on Willard. But it wasn't ready during 1945. I'm sure for a period, people had to go to Seattle to get their mail. And I'm now going to show, this would be building, well, let me just stop for a minute. We had 1, 2, 3 post offices with one that got hurt in the hurricane. In 1945, the war ended. My dad was stationed out in California in the Army Air Corps. And he didn't have enough points to be released from service. So they ordered him over to the Pacific to observe the A-bomb testing at Bikini Atoll. My mother and Kate and I came home to Strathmere at the end of 45, and in 46, I clearly remember going to this house on Willard to get the mail. So I cannot find any documentation. But as far as I'm concerned, this was our 4th post office, and probably only for a few months until Harlan could get the building moved and the garage done and open up the post office next door. Debbie gave me this picture. That's Harlan Wood Camp by the pump. It shows the post office on the building next door, which is now the La Fontana. I don't know who is with Harlan. But the post office opened up there. In 1943, Harlan married a Sea Isle gal by the name of Margaret Pfeiffer. And I suspect that her her siblings and cousins couldn't pronounce Margaret. So for her whole life, she was Goggs. And Harlan and Goggs ran the post office. This is later, this is when it was Harker's, but that's the way I remember it in the 40s when I would go up there to get the mail or spend my nickels. This is Goggs, and Debbie was born in 1951. She's in the coach there, and that's right in front of the post office, and you can see how developed it was on the north side of Willard. I asked Debbie, I said, did you go through the terrible twos? Did you create a problem? Because in 1953, they sold the store and moved over here when she was 2 years old. Now, most of you think that looks like the post office because it's only a couple of years old, that picture. I'm sorry, but I get hoarse talking away. Debbie told me when they moved over there in 53, the porch on the top was the same on the bottom. So when you went up to get your mail, you went up onto the porch and you made a left because Harlan built the post office inside their living room. Really. It took up a big part of the living room. So he got tired of that after about a year and a half, and he closed in the porch and made that the post office so that you would go in the way you do today on the left, but it was boxes across with a window, and there was no way to get from the customer side to the postal side. Goggs was running the post office just about all the time. She could go out into the living room, and they had the rest of their living room back now, but you couldn't get between the two. In the mid-50s, a couple years after that, again, Goggs is doing all the work in the post office because Harlan's a bridge tender and toll taker up on the bridge. And the postal inspectors would come and ask questions, and Goggs knew all the answers. And the postal inspector said, I want to talk to the postmaster. So Goggs would have to send somebody up on the bridge and get Harlan. Harlan would call Eddie Andrus and say, somebody's got to watch the bridge. Harlan would come down and answer the questions, or at least be present while the questions were answered for the postal inspectors. So after a couple years more, I think 80, 50, I'm losing it. It doesn't matter. They made Goggs postmaster, and Harlan was the assistant postmaster. That was in the mid-60s, I guess, and this is in 1980. But you can see how the boxes went all the way across. You could not get from front to back. And Goggs was the postmaster. That's Goggs Woodcamp, Pfeiffer Woodcamp. Harlan died in 1984. She died in 1987. And just before that, she resigned, and she told Debbie, do not let them keep the post office in this building. Because the only way you could do it was the people behind the counter had to go into their living room or whatever to get in and out. And she said, that's too much of a hassle. We don't want that to happen. I don't want that to happen, Goggs. But they couldn't find another place for the post office. They made Debbie a good offer. She said, I'll tell you what, I'll let you do it if you make physical changes. So they took down the right side there and made a pass-through like you know today. And you could run the post office without going into the house. Okay, you're going to see this a couple of times because I want to go back to 1947 a couple of times. We have an entrepreneur here. In 1947, I was 7 years old. I'd gotten a new wagon for Christmas the year before, and I decided I would be an entrepreneur and I would make some money delivering papers. So I went around the north side and south side of Strathmere and got some people to sign up for paper route. I bought them for full price from Harlan for a nickel. And I charged my customers $0.25 a week to deliver the newspapers. And I had maybe 12, 15 customers. It wasn't until years later I realized that $0.25 on 30 cents worth of newspapers was really a high premium. But I guess they wanted to, honor this little kid, and I never got any complaints, so I got the $0.25, and they went into the Cokes and ice cream and whatever. In 1940, I did this for 2 years. In the spring of '49, a circulation manager from the Bulletin came around and said, I think we can sell a lot of newspapers in Whale Beach. Do you know anybody who's willing to deliver papers in Whale Beach? And Harlan said, well, Kenny Weaver delivers in Strathmere. Maybe he'd be willing to. So the circulation guy came up to my grandparents' house and talked to me. And this is not the right newspaper, but it gives you the idea. Said, my cousin Rich and I had just gotten new bikes for Christmas in '48. So in '49, I said, yeah, I'll do that. I bought this great big basket. You could fold 50 papers and put them on the front. And I set off to Whale Beach to deliver 50 papers every day. I had to first develop a route, of course, and then deliver them. Well, this is what I think is a great picture I cribbed off the Riordan real estate website. And there's Whale Beach. There's Taylor Avenue we talked about. That ditch, I think, is the unguarded border between Upper Township and Sea Isle. This is 2nd Street in Sea Isle. That's the way it looks today. And you say, how can this kid think he's going to deliver 50 papers out there, almost all of them on the ocean side of Commonwealth Avenue? Well, I wanted to convince you it was possible, and I went looking for pictures of Whale Beach. it is hard to find pictures of Whale Beach. People have storm pictures, but to look for pictures of just day-to-day Whale Beach, pardon me, it is really hard. I did find this, I delivered up there in 49 and 50. This is an Ocean Drive map in 1950. And this probably isn't that convincing, but it shows streets in Whale Beach. And they were there, and I did deliver to people along those streets. Rutgers University has a pretty good website of old pictures, and I found these Army Air Corps pictures taken in 1944 during the war. And I don't know how convincing you'll find this, but here's Sea Isle, and here's the old bridge that came in, old road that came in 44th Street in Sea Isle. The train had been taken out in the mid-30s. Down there, you can see Whale Creek shaped the same, 44. Here's Corson's Inlet on the right. The old Middle Thoroughfare Flat Bridge got replaced by the Rush-Chatton Bridge, right? There's the old flat bridge that came on in front of the Deauville, to where Harlan was going to build his store the next year or two. And here's Whale Creek, and if you look a little closer, here we have Whale Creek, and I'm going to tell you those are houses. This is what, 80 years ago? The government never declassifies anything. Still marked confidential. But yeah, these were streets with houses, and the railroad had stopped running through Strathmere to Sea Isle at the end of 42 in December. In 43, they took up the tracks. In 44, when they took this, and when I was delivering papers, it was still a big embankment all the way along the bay side of Commonwealth. And this is not a street where 2nd Street is. That's a boardwalk, sort of a pier. It was about this wide, sort of undulated out there. I had a couple of paper customers. I had a new bike. I said, I'm not taking a bike out that thing. So I would put the bike down with all the papers and walk the papers out and come back. And I really did get rid of 50 papers. I always had 6, 8 left over. Remember, people changed every week too. I had to resell a route. But the trailer park was brand new after the war, and I would go into the trailer park and I said, "Get your evening bulletin," and I'd get rid of the last 6 or 8 papers that way. Now, I said how much trouble it was to get pictures of Whale Beach if it wasn't a storm picture. The big storm that drove my family out of Strathmere was November 25th of 50. And I don't know whether this picture is that date, or if it was taken later and it talks about the storm on that date. But that's Dick and Jane Shetler's house. I think he said Buchanan Avenue in Whale Beach. We're looking from the beach. You can see the storm damage. And I think Jane's father actually built that house in Whale Beach. And in 50, I was now done, because after this we moved and I didn't deliver here. But people rebuilt their homes in Whale Beach after the 50 storm. Then came the 62 storm. And nothing could survive in Whale Beach. As you know, as in Strathmere, the Army Corps said, nothing east of the bulkhead, no connections. This is Dick Shetler's house being moved from Whale Beach to Tecumseh Avenue in Strathmere. And it stopped, as you can see, because you got first the telephone wire on the bottom, and then the power. Dick said what they did was, there was no OSHA. They put a guy with a broom up on the roof, and he would lift the wires up, and the truck would go underneath, and then they'd go to the next pole. This is how I spent my money. In 1949, my second cousin, I think, by the name of Larry Heyer, worked for Harlan and Goggs behind the counter over here at the luncheonette. And he took a bunch of pictures, and they years later sent them to Carol to put on the website, and you can look at them on the website. It says summer of 49, and I'll show you two of the pictures. This is one of them. I'd like to say that's me, but I was 9 that year. It looks a little small for somebody delivering 50 papers. So the other picture he took was this one, and that's my cousin Rich on the right. I think that was probably him on the pinball machine, and that's me on the left. Now, I'm going to go back to 47 because it reminds me of when I did the paper route by wagon. I did the north end, and one of my customers was George McGoy. Anybody here remember George McGoy? Pretty famous guy in Strathmere, actually. So I'm glad I'm bringing his name up. George was born in 1895. Wow. So he came to Strathmere at the age of 19 in 1914. And he built a house at the age of 19. And the next year, he went to work for the West Jersey, Pennsylvania Railroad, first as a fireman, then as an engineer. And he ran for 50 years. He worked for the railroad. He ran trains through Strathmere many times on the Ocean City up to Camden Run. He served in World War I. Here's a picture of him in front of the West Jersey Cottage. These pictures are all on Carol's website. Here's a picture of him with Johnny Trainer on the right. George is on the left. He worked as an assistant lifeguard just like my Uncle Al did. Here's a picture of him later. He was one of the founding members of the fire company with the old firehouse and the first fire truck. They were both from the 20s. This picture was from almost 1940. He retired, let's see, 1915, 65. He retired in 65, and at the age of, after 50 years, anyway, and I guess that triggered this interview with the Atlantic City Press. And the storm of 62 had just happened a couple of years before, and the reporter asked him, how did your house do so well when all this damage was done because of the storm of 62? That was the 5 tide storm. And he said, I owe it all to this beams underneath the house that when I came to Strathmere in 1914, the wrecked beams from the General Slocum were still on the beach at Putnam. And so he ordered a prefab house that came in by boxcar on the train, but he didn't have a foundation. So he had these beams dragged up, and they became the foundation of the house, and that's how he claimed the house survived so well in 1962. I don't know how many of you remember the General Slocum story. It was kind of a big thing here around 15 years ago. The General Slocum was an excursion boat that went from lower Manhattan up the East River almost to the Long Island Sound, and they would take people on picnics, and there was a picnic grove up there. It'd be a big day out. This is the General Slocum. In June of 1904, the German-American community in lower Manhattan chartered this boat to take that trip. They had been doing it for years, and they all looked forward to it, and they're ready to go. 10 minutes out of leaving the dock, smoke started coming out of the forward hold. Crew members went rushing up, threw open the hold. That put oxygen into the fire, and the thing started to really go. They tried to put it out with fire hoses. The hoses were all decrepit, basically, not useful. They hadn't told the captain yet. He's way up high. They said, after a few minutes, they said, no, the boat's on fire. He took off as fast as he could. There were oil tanks on the right. He took off toward an island where he could beach the boat and get people off. By going so fast, the flames and smoke went backwards. All these people went to the back. The boat hit the island, tipped. Now, there were 1,300 and some on the boat. Big boat. There were almost all women and children. This was a weekday, a Wednesday. Men were working. Almost nobody in those days knew how to swim. The thing tipped. Out of the 1,300 and some on board, 1,020 died that day. It was the biggest tragedy in New York until 9/11. The fire burned down to the hull. In those days, they repurposed everything. They sold the hull to somebody who made it into a barge, renamed it the Maryland, and it was used to transport coal and coke up and down the coast from Camden, Philly, around our coast up to Newark and New York. And in December of 2011, the last month that we were Corson's Inlet, they ran into a storm off Whale Beach. The tugboat captain looked back and said, "That thing's going to go down and take my boat with it." So he cut the Maryland loose. There were 3 guys on it. He went back and got them off safely, and the Maryland sank a half-mile off Putnam. The next year, February, a month after we became Strathmere, the Army Corps of Engineers said, "That thing's a hazard to navigation. It's out there still just off the bottom." So they dynamited it. And so that's probably why beams in 1914 were available on the beach to go into George McCoy's house. Now, about 15 years ago, we had a guy in the fishing club on the right by the name of Bob Babeski, who was also in the Coast Guard Auxiliary. And he got really interested in this. I took a bunch of pictures over the years for the SIA newsletter, but every June the 15th, he would have some people down from New York that were relatives of survivors or the dead, and he would have a ceremony held by the Coast Guard on the beach. And here the lifeguards would row out here and put a wreath in the water. The next year, he had a few more people, like Coast Guard, and he persuaded the Coast Guard to get a helicopter to drop the wreath in the ocean. And in 2012, it was windy that day. He had more people, but I do not know what happened after that. As far as I know, they never held another ceremony after 2012, but that was the story of the General Slocum going into the foundation of George McCoy's house. In 86, George died and his home was sold. It's 9 North Bayview to Dewey Powell. Many of you remember Dewey Powell. This is probably, and Dewey made a bunch of additions and changes to the house, but it's the same basic house on the same, I think, foundation. This is probably one of the few houses in Strathmere that has 2 driveways and 2 garages, because Dewey was kind of a car nut, right? So if you either walk or drive around North Bayview and you go past number 9, just like if you look at the Deauville and you think there's some old lumber in there from the original Whalen Hotel, if you go past number 9, you can say, oh, the beams from the General Slocum are still holding that house up. I took this picture a couple weeks ago. I'm kind of proud of it. It's the boat that honors Harlan Woodcamp. He did not get that honor for getting me a paper route. If you watch Bill Hanley's presentation on YouTube about the history of the Beach Patrol, you'll know why the Beach Patrol honored Harlan. The second boat is the Legends of Upper Township, or Strathmere boat. And then as you go back, only in Strathmere, a porta potty on the beach, and then the Tetemer Octagon, and then the blank side of our water tower. For those of you who remember the big fight about keeping the whole thing blank and keep Strathmere secret. If you were living in Strathmere in the late 40s, or during the 40s, and the early 50s, and you came up off the beach, you did not go right in the house. There would be a jar of kerosene that would be sitting by the back door on the steps, and you always had to wash your feet off with kerosene because you tracked tar up off the beach. And that tar was from the cargoes of the tankers, a few freighters, but mostly tankers, that U-boats sank off our beaches. In 1944, the same year that that Air Corps plane took those pictures of Whale Beach, a U-boat surfaced right off of Whale Beach. Guys have been underwater, closed in for some time. They scrambled out on the deck. The executive officer's name was Rudy Plappert. He came up the conning tower, took his binoculars, he looked north to Atlantic City, came around, looked in at Whale Beach, Sea Isle. Boy, that's really nice. That would be really a great place to live sometime. He's a U-boat executive officer looking at our coast. Gong goes off, or however they did it. The guys scramble back down into the ship. Boat goes underwater. Now, the U-boats had a very high mortality rate. Not a lot of them made it to the end of the war. But Rudy's did. He was put in a British prison camp for some time, not a long time, months, and then released to go back to Germany. And he was unhappy when he got back to post-war Germany. His hometown of Fulda was right on the East German, West German border, and maybe that was part of the unhappiness. He went to technical school, became an engineer, but he and his wife, Ingeborg, decided that they didn't like Germany, and his sister had married a GI and was living in Camden. So they emigrated over to South Jersey. He worked the New York ship for several years. He made pretty good money. He started thinking about that view he had from the conning tower. And he and his wife came down in 1956, I think, and they were going to put a bungalow on the beach. That was sort of their dream. They went to the Sea Isle town fathers and asked for a permit, and they said, you can't put a bungalow there. It's zoned commercial. This is Whale Beach. It's on just over the line in Sea Isle. So a friend said, why don't you fix them, build a motel? So he did. And Rudy Plappert built a hotel in 59, opened it up. He had a couple good years. And then what happened? The storm of 62. And here he was running. He named the hotel the Dolphin Hotel. He would go drinking with Mayor Raffa down at the Braca Cafe in Sea Isle. But the hotel was almost destroyed in the 62 storm. Of course, it couldn't keep it on the beach. Everything had to go back across Commonwealth. So Dick Shetler said they actually put railroad rails across, it's actually Landis there, and moved the motel in a couple pieces on railroad tracks. And Rudy died in 76, I think, and the place was sold and has since been converted to condos. But that's a current picture from the Riordan website of the Dolphin. Now that it's not on the beach, they changed the name to the Dolphin Beach condos. But that's the Dolphin. So that's another Whale Beach. When I was delivering papers, there was no boundary to me between Upper Township and Sea Isle. That was all Whale Beach. And I consider this sort of Whale Beach. Now, some of you may be wondering why I'm wearing this t-shirt. So I'm going to brag a little bit or talk about, you may not know that where the logo comes from that competes with STM for Strathmere's logo. After the big fire in our house on Bayview, we rebuilt the house. Jessica and I were spending 6 months in the Poconos, 6 months in Strathmere. Dan here, Dan's in front of me. My son Dan was at Penn State. It behooved us to keep our residence in Pennsylvania because the tuition would be cheaper. So we were Pennsylvania residents, but we were coming to Strathmere 6 months out of every year. And in Pennsylvania, you don't have to have a front license plate from the state. And I was coming down to Jersey with a Pennsylvania plate. I thought I'd show some love. So I designed this thing that said Strathmere, keep it secret, and put that on the front of the car. And then we were going to move down and become Jersey residents. I was going to have to get a Jersey plate in the front. I said, I need something else. What can I do to show my love for Strathmere or whatever? So I said, I don't like stickers on a car. I said, I'll get a magnet that I can put on there. So I designed this magnet. I found a guy up in Whitehall, Pennsylvania, up above Allentown, that made magnets. I gave him this, something like this design, and he refined it a little bit, and I said, I love it, I'll take it. He said, well, there's one problem. The minimum order is 100 magnets. I said, oh, I was getting this for my car, but I'm a engineer, not a sales guy, but I said, this is pretty cool. Maybe I can get rid of these magnets. So I started to push these magnets, and it ended up that Steph at the old shack did it very well, and we were able to sell over the years quite a bit of these magnets. But one of the problems, or I'll say I solved the front plate problem by getting New Jersey says you have to have a digit, so I became one with the, But this is a Bayview house, and if you live on Bayview or anywhere along the bay, and Nightmare's coming up, you're really encouraged to have a theme and do something for Nightmare in Strathmere. Well, if I'm pushing magnets, it became pretty obvious what the theme would be in 2007. So I said, okay, we'll go over to Copiers Plus and buy some posters, banners, and put them up. And so Jessica and I ordered a whole bunch of these shirts. And Jessica and I invited some of our closest friends to come over and wear the shirts. And we had people on this part of the deck, and people on the dock, and people on the dock. We didn't make the dog wear a shirt. And here's the whole deck. And when the boats went by, we had all these people crammed in, probably violating some kind of safety rules. And I thought, we're going to win first place. This is really great. But out there where that boat is, that's the Grand Marshal's boat. But the judge's boat went by just as far out. I said, we're going to win this. We went up to Deauville. No dice. We didn't win. I don't know, Ed, if you were the head of judges then, but whoever it was said, oh, we saw all those yellow shirts, but we had no idea we were too far out what the heck it said. So we went from the Deauville back to the house, and we celebrated anyway. You may recognize some of these people. Jessica and I did not give up on Nightmare themes. Next year, we told everybody we were green because we were going to be Strathmere go braless. When the judges went by, some of the women really got into the theme. In 2009, everybody was angry about the taxes going up. We had been reassessed, and Strathmere thought it was being screwed by the way the reassessments were really honing in on us. So we said, okay, everybody wear black. We are the black sheep of Upper. And if you look up on the house, you can see that poor black sheep of Strathmere saying bah, being handled by the upper white sheep who sees dollars, dollars, dollars. 2 years later, we decided. 2 years later, we decided to make everybody happy. So with this little play on words, you're not embarrassed by this. With this little play on words, we made a lot of people happy as they would come up from Bayview onto the porch, onto the deck. Jessica would put a lei over everybody's neck and say, "You've been laid." We were particularly worried about 2 Catholic nuns who came to the party that night. And they got a bigger kick out of it than anybody. Looks like we made a lot of people happy, and it was almost 100%, but apparently we didn't quite get to 100%. For the centennial year, the theme was pretty obvious. We didn't tell anybody to wear something special. We said Strathmere is a town full of characters. Everybody come as the character you want to come as. And we had a birthday cake on the dock and a big one, happy 100th. Many people did the same. Now, for those of you who would be surprised by this, I like pictures and photographs. And on this camera that I hope is taking video, there are over 58,000 pictures. Many of them, of course, in the data centers that they call the cloud, you know. But this one is probably my favorite, or one of the very top pictures of that collection. And this is my family. This is Holly, Lori, Steph. Jessica outdid herself with her character. My son-in-law, Chris, and me. And that was a great party and time in 2012. What we didn't know at the time was it was the last one. 2012, August, was when we had that nightmare. In October, Sandy hit. And not only was a lot of Strathmere damaged, destroyed, our dock was wiped out. So we could not have a party after this one on the dock. We did get it replaced finally, I guess a year more later, with a floating dock. If you're an old guy that's first learning to drive a boat in his 70s, you find out that a floating dock is a heck of a lot better for a boater than that fixed dock, but it's not as good for parties. Now this is 2014, and in 2014, we kind of came to the realization that we couldn't afford to live in Strathmere. I had retired at 65 back in 2005, and we were living on Social Security and the sales revenue from magnets. I'm not going to live in Strathmere on that. But in 2014, so we had to put the house up for sale. I'm going to brag a little bit here. We had a good run. Earlier that year, we had just coordinated or chaired our 5th straight 4th of July parade. Jessica did all the work. I was the front man. True. Jessica had for several years coordinated the Mahjong group, and for several years had coordinated the book club in Strathmere. She worked at the library and then volunteered and then actually worked part-time. Besides the parade, I had discovered how to put photos into an email, and I started writing the SIA newsletter. Up until then, Donna, all the SIA did was send postcards once a year saying, send money for dues. So we created this newsletter. I put all these pictures in every week about what happened last week, what's going to happen next week. Sometimes I wrote long stories like, what are the new FEMA flood regulations going to do to Strathmere? I did a 20-pager, I think, on that. And then we had the Casey's Law for pedestrians. I tried to explain that. Nobody still understands. The fishing club needed a webmaster. So at age 70 or thereabouts, I learned how to be a webmaster. And I posted pictures of tournament winners and social events and occasionally fishing. Because I didn't go out, so I didn't have a lot of fishing pictures. But I did that. And then somebody said to me, Ken, you should serve on the Strathmere Fire Commission. I said, okay, I'll do that. And they said, no, you have to run. It's an elected office. I said, oh, last time I ran, I was in 8th grade, and I lost. So I got on the fire commission. I was there for 1 year, and right over here, we were having a meeting, and Ted Bamford was the chairman, and he said, I'm old and tired, and I want to quit. I'm going to resign, and I nominate Ken to be chairman. I said, okay. A year later, the state passed a law that said every fire commission must have its own website. And so with my newfound skills from the fishing club, I designed a website, and we had the township host it, and we went on from there. In 2015, we sold the house to the JJ Stanton, and we moved down to North Carolina, and Karen and Linda and Wendy took over everything we had been doing. And Strathmere never missed a beat. When we got down to North Carolina, one became a first-in-flight license plate. We really liked St. James. We lasted 4 years, but it was 8 hours from here, and we didn't see the family. And so I missed the Eagles and the Sixers and the Phillies. And so after 4 years, we sold down there and moved up to Egg Harbor Township, where we are now, on a big 1-acre wooded lot that our dogs love and we love, and we're quite happy. Now, I was going to take questions here, but I'm going to just put you off for another couple minutes. Because when I stood up here 10 years ago, this question came up and I didn't know the answer. When did the street names in Strathmere change? And I said, I hadn't really thought about it. I said, my grandparents built a store in 1910, and I knew it was on Tecumseh, so it had to be before 1910. But if you don't know something about Strathmere, you go to Carol's website, strathmere.net. I don't know if you can see this back there, but this is a lot plan from 1904, which is the year before it became Upper. It's part of Sea Isle City, and the main drag is Landis Avenue. Bayview is called Holiday Avenue. If you turn it sideways, oh, I pushed the wrong button. You turn it sideways so that you can read from somewhere. These streets, a lot of them are named after colleges, Penn, Princeton, even Lafayette. I went to Lehigh. And Winthrop, up there where the train station is, I don't think you can see it. It's called Division Avenue. So those are the old Sea Isle names. I'm pretty sure what actually happened is when the town fathers brought Corson's Inlet into Upper Township, they said, we're not going to have the main street named after the guy who founded Sea Isle. So they named it Commonwealth, and somebody else said, let's change them all. You know, it's our town now. So I think that the town's street names changed in the 1905, 1906 timeframe. About, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, the township put this thing out. I'll just do quickly. It shows a mishmash of names down here in terms of alphabetical. Everything's sort of associated with the Civil War or the late post-bellum time, I guess. Buchanan is where Dick and Jane's house was. And there are all these paper streets where we used to have Whale Beach. And interestingly, if you look up at the point, we have Winthrop and then Seacliff and then Seaview is the end. And then you've got paper streets out on the state park. So somebody thought that there was going to be development out there. So this next thing is my last part of the presentation. This is a drawing. A great large version of it hangs on the north wall of John Schmelzer's living room, the old Rosenbach boathouse. It's a drawing that I think is really neat, and I don't know how much of it you can see from where you're sitting, but it has Winthrop Road as Winthrop Road, and Willard, Whittier, whatever, the current street names are on this. So I sort of thought, okay, it's obviously after 1905. If you go down to Tecumseh, there's a little stick there that looked like maybe it's my grandparents' store. So maybe it's as late as 1910. But I think it's really neat. If you look at Winthrop, let's say if you look at the Whalen Hotel, the West Jersey Station, the houses that we used in the postcard along Winthrop, and then nothing really existing north of that. Here comes a train just leaving the West Jersey Station, and it's probably going down across Townsend's Inlet to Stone Harbor, which is where the Pensy ran service in those days from Ocean City to Stone Harbor. There's another train behind it coming across the bay. That'll probably go to Sea Isle, make a right, and go up through Woodbine, Millville, Vineland, and Pensy ferries up in Camden. Here comes a Reading train that originated in Sea Isle. It's going to go out past Twisties, across the island. I always used to call this the Inland Waterway. Now it's the ICW, but it's going to go out that way to Tuckahoe and then up to Winslow Junction and on to the Reading ferries in Camden. There's just a little bit of detail. This helps. This is just, here's Webster and Willard and Williams and Winthrop. And then they continued. It's not Seacliff. It's another W, Winters. And then they went alphabetically. Anglers, Bungalow, Cottage, Dorrance, Edgewater, Fishers. And they've got a couple harbors there. So what you're looking at is a drawing of Old Strathmere as it existed from Winthrop south. And Strathmere as this guy or somebody conceived of in the future from Winthrop north. And the lots are different. These are like blank, and these are all lotted out in grid fashion. And I think this is really a marvelous picture. So I have no right to do this, but I'm going to say maybe it would be a good idea if the SIA thought about this as a fundraiser to convert this. Oh, by the way, to convert this as a fundraiser into high quality prints. I don't know how many of you would like to have something like this hanging on your wall, but if they were framed and big enough that you could actually pick out the detail, I bet a lot of people would be interested in this. Maybe you think about in 26, have this as a take orders, in late 26 deliver. But like I say, I'm an engineer, not a marketing guy. So, and I don't want to speak for the SIA, but I really think this is a cool drawing, and John Schmelzer said he would be fine with such a thing. So now I really am going to open it up. If anybody has questions about Old Strathmere. Ed?
And thanks for this. Can you tell us the motivation behind the name change back then?
No. I cannot. All I know is what's in the articles about the contest. I don't know if there was some confusion between the inlet and the town. But it was a development issue. There's no question the people who were running the contest were selling lots and trying to get people down here to buy lots. So they were trying to make it a name that would attract more people. Otherwise, no. Anything else? Let me just say, if you don't have questions and some come up in the next period of time, we can make a deal with the SIA. We'll do a second addendum.